Ever wonder how Desert Mecca became such a financial powerhouse? Buckle up, because on this deep dive, we're going to unpack a mind-blowing connection.
Yeah, we're talking ancient history, religion, a $350 billion economy.
Seriously, get ready to have everything you thought you knew about Mecca totally flipped on its head.
What's fascinating here is how often history gets overlooked, right? I mean, we see things like cultural or religious practices.
And we don't necessarily think about their origins.
Exactly. So in exploring Mecca's economic significance today and its potential links to ancient sites like, say, Petra's Kazna, it really reveals this fascinating intersection.
Of what? Like faith, history, power.
All of that. Global power dynamics, the whole shebang.
Okay, so unpack this Petra's Kazna thing for me a bit.
Yeah.
For those of us who haven't exactly been brushing up on our ancient history.
Right, so picture Petra. This ancient city carved into these sheer rock faces, like something out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
At the heart of it is the Kazna, this monumental structure. It's also known as the treasury. And according to this source, whose logic is this?
Okay.
This place, it was controlled by the Israelites. It was a central point for their wealth and trade.
Hold on. The Israelites controlling a major trade hub in ancient Petra. How does that tie back to Mecca?
Well, the source draws this really interesting parallel. So you've got the Israelites and their tefillin prayer customs.
Okay, refresh my memory on that one.
Tefillin, those leather straps and boxes they wrap around the arm.
Right.
The source suggests this ritual might echo the circling of the Kaaba in Islam, even the symbolism of the black stone.
Whoa. So we're talking about a potential link between these ancient Israelite rituals and what millions of people are doing in Mecca today.
It's more about exploring historical and symbolic links, not saying it's a direct one-to-one connection or anything.
Okay, but still. And these sources, they're encouraging us to, question the standard narratives, right? Which is what we're here to do.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, let's talk numbers for a second, because you threw out a big one earlier. $350 billion. That's the projected revenue from Hajj and Umrah in Desert Mecca by 2032.
Yeah, and that number it's huge, even when you consider that it's surpassing the projected annual revenue from oil and gas in Saudi Arabia.
Wow. So that basically positions Desert Mecca as what, like a financial titan?
Right. It's a driving force in that region's economy, a global player in religious tourism, the whole 9 yards. I mean, think about it. Millions of pilgrims going there every year. It all adds up.
It's mind-boggling when you put it that way. Okay, but let's circle back to this historical narrative for a sec. You mentioned the Israelites, right, and their potential connection to Petra. But this source, whose logic is this? It also mentions this whole thing about the Israelites being forbidden from returning to Bacca, Jerusalem.
Right, because of corruption? Can you imagine the turmoil, the internal struggles, that must have led to a decree like that?
Yeah, I mean, being forbidden from your own city. Intense.
It forced them to seek out alliances with these major global powers at the time, like the Sasanians, their common enemies, the Arabs, the Byzantines. Classic case of, history's players constantly shifting alliances for strategic gain.
So we've got this story. Forbidden city, corruption, powerful empires, alliances. It's like straight out of a movie. But where does Mecca and its economic power fit into all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, and here's where it takes another wild turn. So some sources suggest that the wealth and prominence of Mecca today might actually be connected to a deliberate shift away from Jerusalem.
Hold on, deliberate. You mean like Mecca's rise wasn't just, I don't know, like a natural progression? Are we saying it was influenced by, what, politics, economics?
Look, this isn't about denying the scrunchial importance of Mecca at all.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that throughout history, religious beliefs have always been intertwined with these power struggles and economic interests.
So you're saying there might have been this strategic move to, redirect pilgrimages, wealth, the whole shebang to Mecca.
It's a possibility the sources raise, yeah.
So it's not just a sacred site, it's... Wow. Right. Okay, that adds a whole other layer to it, doesn't it?
Right, and this is where it gets even more intriguing, because this source, whose logic is this? It brings up this idea of the true Hajj.
The true Hajj? You mean, there's a different version than what we understand it to be now?
That's exactly what it's suggesting. It claims that the true Hajj, it was meant to be this pilgrimage to Bacca, Jerusalem, and it was all about charity.
Interesting.
Supporting the needy, but on a global scale. This whole idea of intertwining religious devotion with taking care of the less fortunate all over the world.
So less about the pilgrimage itself, more about, what, like a system of wealth redistribution?
Yeah. Like imagine religious practices being deeply connected to these social and economic structures.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. We went from ancient Petra and Israelite rituals to the economic powerhouse of Mecca today, and now this whole alternate history of the Hajj. And somehow it all connects.
And we're just scratching the surface here. The important thing is to keep an open mind.
Oh, I am. This is all incredibly fascinating. You definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's take a deeper dive into these ideas and see what other historical surprises await.
You know, it's so easy to just go along with the historical narratives we're taught,
Totally.
But uncovering these alternate perspectives, that's what I find so compelling. Like this whole idea we were talking about, the original Hajj being about supporting the needy worldwide.
Right. It really makes you think about how religious practices evolve. Like, what are the social and economic forces at play that kind of push those changes along?
Exactly. And speaking of economics, this source, whose logic is this, makes a really interesting comparison.
What's that?
The wealth of Mecca and the wealth of the Vatican. It argues that both institutions, they've amassed this significant amount of riches.
Yeah.
And it kind of throws out this question. Does all that accumulated wealth, does it really line up with, the core principles of charity and supporting the poor? The stuff that's supposed to be at the heart of their respective faiths?
It's a kind of a touchy subject, isn't it? I mean, are we saying there's a disconnect between what these religious institutions are saying and what they're actually doing with all that money?
It's definitely a question worth asking, right? I don't think the source is necessarily accusing either institution of, flat out wrongdoing.
Sure.
But it's encouraging us to be critical, to look at this whole relationship between wealth, power, and religious institutions throughout history.
Because those things are always connected, aren't they? Power, money, religion.
Exactly. And understanding those connections can give us this more complete view of how history actually unfolds, like how religious practices have been shaped by things beyond just faith and spirituality.
Right, because it's never just one thing, is it?
Never.
It's like we're seeing this much bigger picture starting to emerge, right?
Yeah.
We've got these potential historical connections between ancient Israelite practices and Islam, this whole idea of a shift away from Jerusalem. And now we're talking about the economic realities of these huge religious institutions.
And don't forget, we're dealing with complex topics here. Multiple interpretations, different perspectives. The sources we're looking at, they offer a particular lens.
Right, a lens that's pushing us to really think critically and come to our own conclusions.
Exactly.
And, speaking of pushing us to think critically, we talked about the potential economic motivations behind Mecca's rise to prominence. But this source, whose logic is this? It also brings up the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, specifically how they played a role in shaping the religious and political landscape. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Of course. So these two caliphates, they were major players in a time of huge change and upheaval. The Umayyads, who came first, they had this really interesting dynamic with Jewish communities. Well, according to the source, they allowed Jews to practice their religion, but they were also very much kept out of positions of real political influence.
So it's like, yeah, you can live here, but don't even think about getting involved in how things are run.
Pretty much. Jewish communities under the Umayyads, they were mostly involved in things like trade and local governance.
Interesting. And what about the Assids? How did they approach things?
So the Abbasids, they came after the Umayyads, and they ushered in what some historians call a golden age.
Okay. Why is that?
They were known for having way more inclusive policies, especially when it came to Jewish scholars and intellectuals.
Oh, more inclusive how?
Under Abbasid rule, Jewish intellectuals, they were really allowed to flourish. They contributed to society in a much more active way.
Like, what were they doing?
Well, for example, they held prominent positions in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which was this renowned center of learning. Think about it. Scholars from all different backgrounds coming together, collaborating, translating texts from Greek, Persian, Indian traditions. It was amazing.
Wow. So it wasn't just about tolerance. It was about actively seeking out and valuing the contributions of these Jewish scholars. How does this tie back into our conversation about Mecca?
Well, you see, the Abbasids, their rise to power, it was fueled in part by these strategic alliances they formed. And these alliances included non-Arab groups like Persians and, yes, Jewish communities.
Okay.
And that, my friend, and how the Umayyad Caliphate fell.
So are we saying that the Abbasids' success, aided by their inclusivity, their alliances with these different groups, that it had this ripple effect? Like it impacted the political landscape, the religious landscape, even shifting things away from the Umayyads, and by extension, maybe even playing a role in Mecca becoming what it is today.
You got it. It's this intricate web of events. We can't say definitively that one event directly caused another, but we can see these fascinating connections, shifts in power, changing alliances, the evolution of religious practices.
It all adds up.
Exactly. And it reminds us that history is never neat and tidy.
It's messy, complicated.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore.
It's like we're looking at one of those, those Where's Waldo pictures. The more you look, the more you see all these little details and connections you never noticed before.
And just like those pictures, history's got all those hidden things, those intricate connections. We're not just talking about memorizing dates and names here. It's about trying to understand the bigger picture.
Right, the why, the how. It's about motivations and beliefs, those underlying currents that kind of drive everything. And speaking of which, we've definitely gone down some interesting rabbit holes in this deep dive. Like some of this stuff about Mecca, it's pretty controversial, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Especially that idea about this deliberate shift away from Jerusalem.
Right. And it's important to remember these are just interpretations. It's not about saying what's right or wrong. It's about giving you the tools to form your own conclusions.
Exactly. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're just trying to offer different perspectives, different lenses, and hopefully get some good conversations going.
Because let's be real, these can be tough conversations to have. We're talking about people's beliefs, cultural sensitivities, interpretations of history that have been around for a really, really long time.
You're preaching to the choir here. So, to our listeners, please remember to approach all of this with respect. Keep an open mind. Different cultures, different religions, they have their own stories to tell, their own ways of seeing the world.
And in those different perspectives, that's where we find the beauty of human history, the fact that there's always more to learn, more to question. We can always go a little deeper.
And that's what makes these deep dives so much fun. They totally upend what you thought you knew, make you question everything.
And leave you with more questions than answers. But that's the whole point, isn't it? It's not about getting to some final destination. It's about the journey of exploration.
Love that. Okay, so as we start to wrap things up here, is there anything in particular you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
Well, first and foremost, question everything.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to dig deeper, to look for those alternate explanations, to challenge the easy answers.
Wow.
Remember that history, religion, economics, it's all connected. Understanding how those things intersect, it can really open your eyes to how this crazy world of ours works.
Couldn't agree more. We can't just look at those things in isolation, can we? It's all intertwined.
And lastly, just be curious, be respectful, keep that open mind. Embrace the fact that there are tons of different ways of seeing things. Never stop learning.
So well said. This has been an incredible journey. We started with this super-powered economy in desert Mecca, traveled back in time to ancient Petra, explored those potential connections between ancient Israelite practices and Islam, and then dove headfirst into the whole wealth and power thing.
Quite the ride. But remember, it doesn't end here. Take those threads, keep pulling on them, see where they lead you. You never know what you might discover.
I love that. To all our listeners, thank you so much for coming along with us on this deep dive. Keep those minds curious, keep those perspectives open, and we'll catch you next time.